Middle East, a modern name for a region shaped by millennia of conflict and faith. From the Crusades to the rise and fall of the Ottoman Empire, its history is marked by sacred visions and imperial designs. And we understand its present shape by studying its layered past.
My name is Christine Ockrent. I'm a journalist, usually based in Paris, and it is a great pleasure for me to meet with you, Professor Gabriel Martinez-Gros. You are a professor of medieval history at the University of Paris-Nanterre.
Right.
So it's very strange for me to talk to you in English, but I'll do my best.
I'll do my best too.
You gave a fascinating lecture this morning about Ibn Khaldun, which carried us back in the 14th century with this extraordinary intellectual who I believe was born in Tunis.
In Tunis.
And
right.
lived and worked and wrote in southern Spain, in Andalusia. And what you explained to us is that Ibn Khaldun in the 14th century is, in fact, the father of modern sociology.
Right. Or modern economics.
Or both.
Or both.
How
That
come?
is. His theory is quite original. There's nothing similar in the Muslim world, as well as in the Christian world at that time. And one of the great questions that was not answered, in fact, in the 19th century when he was translated for the first time from Arabic to European and Western language, that was French in fact, is where he comes from. That is, where his thought comes from. And it is still a mystery, in fact. My idea is that it comes from the plague, the Great Death, the Black Death, which killed more than half of the population of the Mediterranean world on the northern side, that is a Christian side, and as well as on the southern side, the Muslim side. And this extermination of the population, it was a terrible problem for the states as they exist. It is their income, their fiscal income, crumbled, of course, and it poses the problem of what is a state? How does it work? How does it crumble? And that is really the problem of Ibn Khaldun, I think.
He explains, from what I read, of course, from your own writings, Ibn Khaldun explains the rise and fall of a kingdom.
Yes, dynasties.
In relation to the solidarity, to the extent to which any society can remain, in fact, closed in, and with a feeling of a sort of common good.
Yes, that's right. That is the end of his demonstration. That is, the main idea is that the huge majority of the population must be assigned to work and to production of riches, production of intellectual income. So it must be disarmed. You must transfer the natural energy of the man, which is somewhat violent, into actions of prosperity, into actions of production, objects or thoughts of whatever.
So he's a productivist.
He is a kind of productivist, exactly. So as you need a little amount of violence to maintain order and to defend this disarmed and peaceful community which is working, you have to hire kind of mercenaries which are generally drawn from the tribes around the territory of the state of the empire. And so there are two different, quite different types of people in a society. The violent ones, who are generally sovereign ones, of course, because they have the arms, and so they are in power. Generally, they are in charge of power, and the huge majority of those who are producing. But the importance is producing, in fact, and the violent and the solidarities, which are generally violent solidarities, are just to protect the productive activity of the main part of the society. And the main part of the society is not allowed to solidarities, because solidarities are dangerous for power. You have to break solidarities. You have to transform the clans, the families, the tribes into individuals. The state finds out the individual as a model of producing society.
But that individual has to produce wealth, as you say, and he has to pay taxes.
Of course.
Because that's the great notion that comes out in the 14th century, is that taxation is the very definition of the state. It's the very definition of political power.
Yes. The curious thing is that in the West, it is exactly at the same time that taxation begins, really. State government taxation with the 100 Years' War and with the plague, of course, because the plague makes that the state in the states a need for more money, and that money was flowing quite naturally before the plague, but after the plague, you have to exact it from the people. So you have to establish a code of taxation which is much more rigid than it was before, and it is the same in the Muslim world, in fact. And Ibn Khaldun began being an administrator of a state.
A civil servant.
A civil servant, exactly, a civil servant.
And how were his ideas welcome at his time? Was he well known? Was he respected? Or the contrary? I mean, was he looked upon by the political power as a dangerous intellectual?
Yes, to a certain extent, yes, you're right. He was very prudent, very, very prudent, and he was right. He died in his bed. But, of course, what he said about the power, about the way the power works, was not very popular, not among the violent people generally in power, but among the intellectuals, among what they say in the Arab world, the ulama, the ulama, that is the wise, and in fact the intellectuals, the clerks, we will say in the medieval Western world. And it is an explanation of his trajectory, that is from Tunis, where he was born, to southern Spain, and then to Cairo, where he died. But he went to Cairo to find more students than he could find in Tunis or in Muslim Spain or in any other part of the Maghreb, of the Western world.
And Cairo, in those days, was a sort of capital for scholars?
It was a capital for scholars. It was the main city of the Arab-speaking world. And it was a city in which universities and colleges were very numerous, and he found quite rapidly his place in Cairo. He was appointed as a judge for the Maghrebi community in Cairo, which was quite numerous, and he was generally very well received by the violent, those who were in power, and at that time they were Mamluks. They were generally Turks. They didn't speak Arabic, but they showed, they paid real respect for the Arabic ulama. And Ibn Khaldun had more difficulties with his colleagues, ulama, than with the Turk, coach, or a layer of power.
And how has his legacy survived him for so many centuries? Because there must have been very erudite scholars in those days who just vanished.
Of course.
But
of course,
his legacy, thanks to you in particular, is still around.
There was a little stream of memory of what he said or what he wrote during the Ottoman period. It was translated into Turks, the Ottoman Turk, what we call the Osmanlı, but it was not very important. It was in the 17th century, and he had the fame, already had the fame of being a thinker of a decline. And when the Ottoman Empire felt that its decline had begun, some were interested in translating Ibn Khaldun to see if there was a remedy to the decline. And fortunately, in Ibn Khaldun's thought, generally there is no remedy to anything. There is something which is quite inevitable, unavoidable
in the decline,
in the evolution of societies. But the great moment...
So it's not enough to keep raising taxes.
Exactly.
No,
exactly. You keep raising taxes until the final disaster. In fact, you cannot go on exacting taxes, and the dynasty crumbles. In fact, and the great moment for Ibn Khaldun is the 19th century, when he was discovered by European scholars. In France, Sylvestre de Sacy, the first, under the reign of Napoleon, and some others. And French first, because he was attached to the conquest of Algeria. During the conquest of Algeria, the French military found out that they did not understand anything to that tribal word. And the general interpreter of the French army in Algeria told the generals, but I have a text. I have a text about it. It's interesting. You give me only 5 years in Paris rather than Algiers, which was quite boring, quite evidently. There's a text, that text was Ibn Khaldun, general history. And he translated, that general interpreter, Baron de Slan, he translated first the last volume, which are dedicated to the Maghreb, to North Africa, and in fact there is not really anything very interesting. But in the first tome, which is the theoretical tome about the way the societies work, the states work, that was very, very interesting. And it was for the European intellectuals, I would say, really a discovery. It seemed impossible that in the 14th century a man could think according to those terms. Some were quite convinced that it was a forgery, and it was not, in fact. But the mystery remains. So there was a legend of afterward, a legend of Ibn Khaldun. That is, first a genius, an absolute genius. He did understand everything about the Muslim societies, only Muslim societies, not our societies, but anything about the traditional agrarian societies. And it is a man with which we are whom we are going to govern Algeria or India. Same. In the same time, it is a lonely genius. He is out of his time, 14th century, and he is out of his civilization. He is not really a Muslim thinker. And so that is the reason of a kind of a counterattack after the independence of Algeria, Maghreb, etc. That is, Ibn Khaldun was a kind of corroborator of the French, and it was the reason why he was so unpopular for some decades in Algeria. Especially Algeria, little less in Morocco and Tunisia. Where it was
a sort of collaborationist with colonialist power.
That is.
And how did you get so involved?
I read it rather late in my career. I was interested in other subject topics, etc. But I was struck by an extraordinary power of thought. But I discovered also that he has not been fairly explained up to this time. Because what was quite obvious in what he said is the distinction between the violent and the productive. And so it was transformed because violent is Bedouin in his language and productive is sedentary. Well, it was transformed into a philosopher of the opposition between nomads and peasants. What is absolutely not. The difference between violent and productive requires the existence of the state. It is fundamentally the thinker of the state and not of peasants and nomads. And so, and also the people were absolutely fascinated by his analysis of violence. And I think the most important is production. It is a productive part of the society. It is fundamentally a peaceful thinker or a thinker of peace. But how do you establish the conditions of peace? And you need a little violence to establish the conditions of peace. And that is the tragic contradiction of human societies in general for him.
And it is true to this day. So would you agree that Ibn Khaldun, 14th century, is indeed the ancestor to Max Weber and Durkheim and all those who actually created modern sociology?
Absolutely. There is one great difference between him and those You mentioned, for example, Max Weber, or political thought, the Western political thought since the 17th or 18th century, Hobbes or Rousseau. It is that the Western thinker generally are afraid with the state, the power of state. It's Orwell, and generally Ibn Khaldun is afraid with the weakness of the state. That is, the state, peaceful state, needs a certain amount of violence. It is inevitable. It is unavoidable. You need a little poison to be sane, to be safe, to be in good shape. And so the poison does vanish with the time. And you are weaker and weaker, defenseless and defenseless, more and more productive, but more and more incapable to defend yourself. And so you have to take another dose of violence,
antibiotic,
of poisons. It is a kind of biotic philosophy. And antibiotic philosophy, by the way, of course. Yes. That is, there is something of an organism in the vision of society by Ibn Khaldun, and that was quite rare at the time. In fact, really, that is the idea that the king is the head of society. It's quite common, and of course, but the fact that the society as a whole is weakening, and when it is weakening, when the violence in society, the capacity of defense of society are weakening, there is nothing to do, really nothing to do, to improve the situation, to recover a kind of power, and that there is a normal death, an inevitable, a natural death in society, just like there is an ordering and a natural death in individuals. That is a very strong thought, and rather rare, in fact, if you consider the way he tries to demonstrate it, and I think he succeeds in demonstrating.
And his demonstration is based on facts.
Yes,
and that is also remarkable at a time where not only is there religion, but of course a culture which is not fact-oriented the way we pretend, or at least we're trying to keep our culture.
That's right. That's right. That's one of a subject of astonishment among the historians or philosophers of the European 19th century. That is, there is very little religion in what he says, and in fact, religion is that. Two things fundamentally for religion. The fact that it is a kind of glue for the tribes when they are engaged in an endeavor of conquest of a state. Generally, the tribes are at odds one with another. And so to make them join in a common enterprise, they need a glue, and that glue is religion, generally. And the model is, of course, the Arab conquest. Islam was the glue to make the Arab tribes really powerful and united in order to the conquest of the Middle East. And the second point is that you can hardly make a conquest without a kind of religious glue. But if you have only the glue And if you try to make a revolt and wage a war with sedentary, peaceful people, you fail. Quite evidently. Religion is absolutely unable to establish a dynasty or a state as it by itself.
That's a very contemporary conclusion. Professor Martinez-Gros, merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
Thank you
to you.